A lot of Marxists claim to be committed to the ruthless criticism of all that exists, though this slogan can often appear to only apply to other people, not to the critics themselves. Unfortunately, a kind of criticism for thee but not for me attitude regularly reveals itself. But one of the hallmarks of a principled socialist is the ability to not only give criticism in an effective, comradely way, but also to receive criticism without becoming needlessly defensive, and consequently engage in principled self-criticism and correction of the errors, at least if the content of the criticism is correct. However, it's not always clear to those who are new to Marxism, or indeed some of those who've been Marxists for years, why such criticism and self-criticism are necessary, nor how one would actually go about engaging in such a process. So today we're going to discuss the matter of why criticism is necessary for the development of our movement, explaining its connection to the Marxist method specifically, as well as providing some guidelines on both how to give constructive criticism as well as how to receive it in a principled, comradely manner. Now, the first question that needs to be asked when crit and self-crit arises is, why do we need to engage in criticism? Why can't we simply just let it go when we notice people making mistakes? Surely that would be the most peaceful approach, and generally speaking, the easiest for everyone. So, win-win, no? No, lose-lose in fact. Everyone, including the person who made the mistake, is worse off when we fall into this approach. Mao Zedong wrote in 1937 that, to let things slide for the sake of peace and friendship when a person has clearly gone wrong, and refrain from principled argument because he is an old acquaintance, a fellow townsman, a schoolmate, a close friend, a loved one, an old colleague or old subordinate, or to touch on the matter lightly instead of going into it thoroughly so as to keep on good terms, the result is that both the organisation and the individual are harmed. This is one type of liberalism. But what does it mean to claim this as liberalism? Are we simply saying, thing bad, therefore liberal? No. Mao here is contrasting the worldview of the bourgeoisie, liberalism, with the worldview of the proletariat, Marxism. You see, according to Marxism's underlying philosophy, dialectical materialism, the struggle of opposing forces is what pushes progress forwards. Indeed, according to the Marxist scientific method, historical materialism, which relies on the underlying philosophy of dialectical materialism, the struggle between different classes is what propels history forward from one stage to the next. Class struggle brought us from slave society to feudalism, from feudalism to capitalism, and class struggle once again will progress us from capitalism to socialism. So from the Marxist perspective, conflict, the struggle between opposing forces, leads the way to progress. How this manifests in criticism and self-criticism should now be starting to become apparent. When a person makes some kind of harmful error, say for example they make a sexist joke, not only are those around this person harmed by the action, but the erroneous person themselves too is also harmed by not being struggled with and given the opportunity to correct the error and progress socially. Letting sexism slide entrenches division among the people when what we need is unity. The bourgeois liberal individualist attitude is to let it slide because this prevents collective social progress, impeding the development through constructive criticism and self-criticism of unity among the working class and oppressed masses towards the overthrow of the current system. Now, when we discuss criticism, it's crucial to understand that we engage in this process of struggle in order to achieve unity. A principled unity derived from the collective correction of errors rather than an unprincipled unity based on letting things slide and merely papering over serious problems. However, in order for unity to be achieved, there needs to be some kind of basis for this unity. There's no point in engaging in the process of criticism and self-criticism with class enemies of the people, with the imperialist bourgeoisie, with fascists, and so on. The contradiction with such groups is antagonistic, and as such it can't be resolved through mere words. But for the vast majority of working and oppressed people, contradictions are generally non-antagonistic, and there is some basis for unity to one degree or another. Be it broad tactical unity on single issue matters, the unity of the United Front within its mass organisations, Or the highest level of unity, the unity of Marxists within a revolutionary party itself. Now, when we approach the matter of criticism and self-criticism, it's important to remember the formula unity, struggle, unity. We begin from the position that there is a basis for unity. We then proceed to struggle via criticism, self-criticism, and initiating the process of correcting these errors. And upon rectification, when the matter is resolved, we've progressed to a higher level of principled unity. Unfortunately, some people seek to follow a model of unity, unity, unity by simply shying away from conflict or ignoring problems, which inevitably fester and cause much greater problems down the line. While others still, perhaps over-enthusiastically, follow a model that more closely resembles struggle, struggle, struggle. The approaches at both of these extremes are deeply harmful to the development of a healthy, collective revolutionary movement. Remember, we only struggle in order to achieve unity, to lift each other up rather than to knock each other down. Bourgeois intellectual jousting and performative debate, which serve no other purpose than to bolster the egos of the individual participants, are of no interest to proletarian revolutionaries. Our criticism and self-criticism needs to be a constructive experience that benefits the collective movement. A non-coercive struggle that's carried out patiently through a process of education and persuasion, rather than browbeating and bullying people into submission. Now, as revolutionaries, in order to truly serve the people, we have to be open to criticism from everyone and anyone, not just other Marxists. As Mao explained in 1941, if we have shortcomings, we are not afraid to have them pointed out and criticised because we serve the people. Anyone, no matter who, may point out our shortcomings. If he is right, we will correct them. If what he proposes will benefit the people, we will act upon it. However, this criticism that we receive may not always be delivered in the most palatable form, to put it gently. In fact, the criticism we receive is often quite hostile. And yet, underneath that hostility, there may still be some truth in the criticism. This is why we as revolutionaries always have to be able to distinguish the content of the criticism from the form that it takes. Not just focusing on the way the criticism is delivered, the form, but focusing primarily on the substance of the criticism, the content. For socialists, we understand that the content of the criticism is primary, that the core of the criticism is the most important part rather than the form of how the criticism is delivered. When receiving criticism, we can't as Marxists allow ourselves to get lost in a quagmire of taking criticism as personal insults that damage our egos, no matter how unpleasantly the criticism may have been delivered. With that being said, not everyone is a steeled Marxist as of yet. So we do also need to pay attention to form, particularly when we as Marxists are giving criticism to others. As Vicky Legion puts it in Constructive Criticism, a handbook, while the political content of a criticism is definitely primary, how we give criticism directly influences how well the content gets across. Well-expressed criticisms help clarify differences in ideas and make the class content of the contending positions more accessible to people. They are more likely to draw out the political issue and less likely to obscure it in a fog of personalising and defensiveness. And so, in order to effectively criticise others, while recognising the primacy of the content, we also need to pay attention to the form in which we deliver it, so as not to create any unnecessary barriers to the criticism actually being accepted. Let's take a look now at some further guidelines for effectively giving criticism to others. In the aforementioned text, Constructive Criticism, a handbook, the author provides us with a useful 4-part formula for providing Marxist criticism. First, we begin with explaining our concrete, objective observations on the matter being criticised. Second, we then describe our subjective feelings and emotions about that concrete observation. Third, we clearly state our wants and desired outcomes from this criticism. And fourth, we explain the purpose of this criticism, that is, the political motivation for the criticism. As Legion puts it by way of example, when you do A, observation, I feel B, emotion, and I want you to do C, action want, because of D, purpose. Let's break down each of these 4 parts in a bit more detail. 1. Objective observations, being concrete. In order to provide concrete analyses of concrete conditions, we need to learn to separate our subjective feelings and inferences from objective facts. When giving criticism, begin by explaining clearly the objective action that you have observed, separating this objective fact from any subjective inferences that you may have drawn from that action. In particular, always separate inferences about people from the concrete actions that were observed. Don't simply say you are a rude person, which would be a subjective inference. Explain instead that you said X to me. This concrete observation has to be the starting point. Objective observations of problems, rather than subjective inferences about people, convey maximum useful information and avoid causing the confusion sown from subjective inferences. Always avoid making judgments about the characters of others based on inferences, in an undialectical, static manner that pigeonholes people eternally, as though they can never change. Deal with the objective facts first and foremost. 2. Describing feelings and emotions. After providing the concrete, objective, observed basis for the criticism, then we can proceed into discussing the subjective effect that this observed problem had on you. That is, the feelings and emotions that it caused. Avoid going to either extremes of trying to act like you're a robot who doesn't have any feelings or emotions, or conversely of attempting to make your subjective feelings the most important part of the criticism. Simply express the subjective emotion that this objective action made you feel, such as, this thing you did made me feel frustrated, or that joke you cracked made me feel uneasy. Now, be careful to avoid using I feel in the same matter as I think in order to smuggle in inferences and judgments about the person being criticised. For example, saying I feel like you're a gobshite really means I think that you're a gobshite based on my subjective inferences from what you've done. This again pigeonholes the person being criticised and leaves no room for dialectical development. Remember, dialectical materialism holds that everything is interconnected and constantly changing, and that things can become their opposite through struggle. So, we struggle to bring about the change that we know as Marxists there's a basis for. Keep it simple, express the feeling. I feel upset, I feel angry, and so on, and progress with the criticism. 3. Stating wants and desired outcomes. After explaining what happened objectively, then explaining how it affected you subjectively, you need to explain clearly what your wants and desired outcomes are from this criticism. State directly who you want to do something rather than leaving it vague. Don't leave criticism open-ended and implied, such as, all of us here in the room today should work on X. No, state clearly, Paul, I want you to do X. Beyond that, specify precisely what you want the person to do rather than how you want them to be or to feel. Be concrete. What action do you want to be taken specifically? Don't just say what you don't want, emphasize instead precisely what you do want. 4. Explaining the purpose and political motivation of the criticism. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, explain the political motivation for the criticism. Explain how the thing being criticised is harmful for the collective, and how its correction will strengthen the movement. Proletarian criticism can never be based on punishment, bullying, or browbeating anyone into submission, as we've experienced and come to expect from bourgeois society. The proletarian revolutionary approach instead is a process of non-coercive, patient education and persuasion in order to, as they say, cure the sickness to save the patient. As Vicky Legion puts it, our method of transforming those being criticised relies not on punishment or bribery, but on education. Education based on the dialectical conception that the process of change begins primarily with internal commitment. It relies on educating others about the purpose for the desired change, and it can only be used among the people, the persons with whom our long-term class interests do not conflict. When I'm operating from this dialectical understanding, I want the other persons to change, not out of fear or obligation, but because they see how the change will benefit the whole group, the whole organisation, the whole working class, themselves included. Now on to perhaps the most challenging part, receiving criticism. When someone initiates a criticism leveled towards you, take a deep breath and remember, criticism is a gift. If the criticism is correct, then the criticism provides you the opportunity to grow and develop, no longer condemned to committing the same harmful mistakes of the past over and over again. And if the criticism is incorrect, then this offers you the opportunity to not only sharpen and refine your own positions, but also to help educate the person offering the criticism. In both cases, the end result is a stronger collective movement. Well, providing the criticism has been handled correctly in a principled manner that seeks to elevate rather than just knock down with insults and the likes. With that being said, we have to remember that not everyone is a developed Marxist, and not everyone will yet be able to give concrete criticism based on the earlier formula. And so, as Marxists receiving criticism, we always need to dig beneath the form of the criticism in order to uncover its content as explained earlier. Now, the goal of the struggle of criticism is to get a message across as clearly and concisely as possible so that a resolution and unity can be achieved. When receiving criticism, a useful way of helping this process along and ensuring that we're receiving the correct message that the person giving the criticism is trying to convey, no matter how haphazardly, is by paraphrasing our understanding of the criticism back to them. This way, we can both be assured that the correct message is being conveyed and any misinterpretations can be corrected. Remember, just because you're paraphrasing it back to them, that doesn't necessarily mean you agree. It just means that now you're both able to engage clearly with the actual criticism itself, whether it's correct or incorrect. Regardless of whether the criticism is necessarily correct or incorrect, whether it be delivered with crystal clarity or as a muddled mess, we have to seek the truth that lies beneath, and try our best to empathise with the person giving us this criticism. As Legion writes, it would be great if everyone would give criticisms in the clear, concrete way we've been talking about. But since we've all been drilled in categorical and static thinking, we often have to deal with criticisms that come at us as sharply defined as a cotton ball and as friendly as a meat cleaver. As revolutionaries, it's our responsibility to hear and learn from all criticisms, no matter what form they come in. The goal is to learn how to receive any criticism so that we can learn from it, without counter-attacking defensively and without getting wiped out. Empathizing is a way to receive vague or one-sided criticism as a statement of the criticizer's observations, feelings, wants, and purpose. Using this guideline prevents me from taking criticisms as a character judgment of me, and allows me to use and learn from any criticism that comes my way. It's our duty as Marxists to discipline ourselves into avoiding knee-jerk defensive reactions, and instead responding from a place of genuine empathy that seeks to understand what lies at the core of the criticism, the concrete observation being criticized, how this is making the person providing the criticism feel, what they want us to do about this, and the political motivation behind the criticism. Again, empathizing is not necessarily agreeing, but when we get to the root of the matter, beyond the fog of personal insults and defensiveness, then the real move towards the correct political position to strengthen and uplift the working class and oppressed masses can begin, and principled unity can be achieved. Today we've taken a brief look at the proletarian method of criticism based on the Marxist worldview. Criticism and self-criticism are essential aspects of our method that help us to correct our errors, both past and present. If we shy away from engaging in the process of criticism and self-criticism, then our movement is doomed to repeat the same mistakes of its past and to ultimately fail. As Lenin warned in 1922, all the revolutionary parties that have perished so far perished because they became conceited, because they failed to see the source of their strength and feared to discuss their weaknesses. We, however, shall not perish, because we are not afraid to discuss our weaknesses and will learn to overcome them. In engaging in criticism and self-criticism, bringing to light these weaknesses, it's essential that we always remain committed to the process of non-coercive, patient education and persuasion, so as to lift our comrades up, rather than just knock them down. To finish up, one last important instructive passage from Mao Zedong. In opposing subjectivism, sectarianism, and stereotyped party writing, we must have in mind two purposes. First, learn from past mistakes to avoid future ones. And second, cure the sickness to save the patient. The mistakes of the past must be exposed without sparing anyone's sensibilities. It is necessary to analyse and criticise what was bad in the past with a scientific attitude so that work in the future will be done more carefully and done better. This is what is meant by learn from past mistakes to avoid future ones. But our aim in exposing errors and criticising shortcomings, like that of a doctor curing a sickness, is solely to save the patient and not to doctor him to death. A person with appendicitis is saved when the surgeon removes his appendix. So long as a person who has made mistakes does not hide his sickness for fear of treatment, or persist in his mistakes until he is beyond cure, so long as he honestly and sincerely wishes to be cured and to mend his ways, we should welcome him and cure his sickness so that he can become a good comrade. We can never succeed if we just let ourselves go and lash out at him. In treating an ideological or political malady, one must never be rough and rash, but must adopt the approach of curing the sickness to save the patient, which is the only correct and effective method. Right, thanks very much for watching this video. Hopefully you found it useful in one way or another. Most of the advice for giving and receiving criticism in this video comes from Vicky Legion's excellent text, Constructive Criticism, a Handbook. Legion's text explains this advice in much greater depth, and it also provides various exercises to be practiced in order to develop our skills for giving and receiving constructive criticism. Ideally, this text should be read through collectively with an organisation, or in absence of that, perhaps a reading group. You can buy physical copies of the book from Foreign Languages Press, or you can read it on Marxists.org. Both are linked in the description box below. Special thanks to the supporters on Patreon who continue to make each of these videos possible with their generous donations. Thank you Blue Collar Red, Julia Affentranger, Eric Graham McEachern, BJB7, Gato Ansok, Vangelo, Jolie, Ugopnik, Grimwater, Ryan Hodgson, Soup, Michaela Schmid, Christian Napales, Alfonso Dingo Torres, Rock Gardist, Zakassi, Anglo-Irish Bolshevik, Thomas Rawson Wood, Bobby Block, Jason Schmidt, Mitch Schiller, Sirshini Violin, Roja, MLM in Practice, Eric Lindahl, Robert Jarzak, Anastasia, Wonderbad, JT Chapman, Joseph Shepard, Comrade Amara, Wealth for the 99%, Peter Kraus, Hagen Mitchells, Carlos DeLuna, 23 Skidoo, John Purser, Rodrigo Pichardo, Chairman Bruh, Vacha Fiuca, Tiers Cadigan, Brian Lounge, Sexy Socialists, Catraist Maoist, Noel Hemdahl, Richard Scott Wigton, Connor L, and Chairman Eris. Cheers everyone, agus slán go fóill.